Hey, thanks so much for finding the video. Do us a favor. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe. And be sure to leave your comment. We love to interact. Enjoy the video. Let's start with the gigantic story, literally and figuratively, about Ryan Ramczyk, man. He gets the massive deal. We expected it.
Yep.
What did you think of the terms of the deal? 5 years, $96 million.
That didn't really surprise me any, not in today's market. But he hits the check marks on the four things I would look for when I give a long-term, huge contract. And that would be one, talent. He's the best right tackle in pro football. And it's funny that every year, in the back of my book, I'll write about the top players in the NFL, and I go to 12, 13. Well, this year was actually 14 guys that have been either in the NFL in an advisory standpoint, meaning director of player personnel or general manager, current ones, former players who keep up with the game, coaches, same way. Ramczyk was the top right tackle for every one of them, every one. And so it was interesting, and my feeling was that, but I just kind of wanted to get it from them too. So you had the talent level, and then age, 27 years old. For an offensive lineman, and he's entering the best 5 years of his playing time, barring an injury. When you're 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, normally, man, you hit your peak at that particular point. Now, you can play beyond that, but normally that's when you're your best in that time frame. Durability is third. He's missed one game, and that's because they sat him.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the guy who's been a warrior for you. And the fourth thing is knowing him is his work ethic. Money's not going to change him. You have to be careful. I think especially in the free agency world, when you don't know that player as well as the guy that you've been with all those years, you don't know. You might think you know him, but how well will money and at that type of money change his work ethic? With Ryan, it's not going to change him. He's still going to be the same guy. His commitment to be the very best, his work ethic, his mental work, physical work, it's all going to stay the same. He hits every check mark that I would look for when I would give a long-term deal to a player. And so, again, with quarterbacks, that might be a little bit different because, in today's world, these guys can play deep into their 30s and still be pretty good, barring any sort of major injury. But, man, for an offensive lineman, he's what you're looking for. To think that he lasted that long on draft night was remarkable. We had gotten word this was the pick right before the Saints that they were looking at the linebacker from Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Reuben Foster, yep.
Yep, and Reuben had tumbled because of off-the-field issues. There were some concerns about it, not about talent. I remember Rick Venturi telling me, Mike, he's one of the top 5 players in this draft class, just from talent. He said, okay, explain me the issues. And, and then once we got into, he said, well, I can see why, maybe he might have a little bit of a tumble. He really took a tumble to go all the way down to 31. And the Saints were on the phone with him talking. What would have happened had he been available? Who knows? But you're not on the phone with somebody if you're not interested. Okay? You interested. And the 49ers traded up and able to select him in late in round 1, and then Ramczyk's there. It was easy when I looked at the board. He was the top guy there. A lot of people wanted pass rushers, but he was the best player up on that board at that point. And so you understood why you picked him. Everybody's life has twists and turns, and nothing's conventional today. Nothing. And the way he went through college is really unconventional.
Yeah.
Because at one time he thought seriously about being a welder. I mean, that was his deal, that he was going to be a welder. And it ends up he's piping together something all right. He's piping together a Hall of Fame career, and he's the highest paid right tackle in pro football. So I think it was a great move by the Saints. We all understand the salary cap and how it's going to work down the line with this increased amount of money coming in from so many different angles, talking about not only television, radio rights, but also from the gambling part of it, which now they're heavily involved in advertising and everything else. That revenue is going to increase tremendously. And we talked about it in the moments or maybe days before Dak Prescott signed that things had heated up. Well, who knew about that deal better than Jerry Jones? So Jerry knew it.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was the kind of precursor to everybody that, hey, guys, this is an unbelievable deal. Yeah, I'll cut that deal with Dak now. I'll cut him that deal because I know today what I'm going to get, not only today, but tomorrow and in future years. So, and listen, it's tough. About a lot of people, I wouldn't spend that money on a right tackle. I'd spend it on a left, not a right. Well, here's the thing, what you don't understand. In this league, I can move people around, okay? Just like pieces on the chessboard. I can move them around. And if you got a weak right tackle, I'm putting my best pass rusher up against him. He's not necessarily always stuck as a right defensive end going up against a left tackle. I can move him to left defensive end and put him on that right tackle and see what happens. Now, the only thing about that is if you're a right-handed quarterback, you seeing the guys basically sack you on the left side. You might feel it,
right,
but you're going to see it coming from that edge. So, I'm all for this. I think it's a great deal for the Saints, great deal for Ramczyk. And, again, when you look at what you would want to spend your money on, a super talented player who's considered one of the elite at his spot, his age at 27, his durability, and his work ethic, you got what you want. So you got to secure him. Now, you might have other things to think about with other players, but we've talked about this before. You didn't have to think about that with Ramczyk.
Right. We talked about Ryan Ramczyk. The Saints extend him. Now, in so doing, they've also freed up about $5.5 million in cap space, according to the guys over at Over the Cap. So the Saints are in the neighborhood of $11 million in cap space now. Okay, so what do?
I go find me a cornerback and quickly because, again, when you look at this football team, it's the one area where, other than Lattimore, you have no idea what else you have. You have a young player in Paulson Adebo who you think can be a really good player for you. He's never played one game. Patrick Robinson, because of his age and now some injuries throughout that time frame, you're not sure what you're going to get out of that. P.J. Williams, who's a valuable piece of your secondary, but he has really been better at that nickel safety position or dime safety position than he has been outside corner. You got to go get your cornerback, and whatever's available out there. If it's through free agency or through a trade, you got to go get one. And I would be seriously looking at a second. Again, Matt, everything's clean right now. Okay, you haven't been in a practice. You not been through the rigors of training camp. What happens if somebody goes down to an injury? Now where are you at? Yeah. You're back at square one again. So, man, I would take a long look at that if I could maybe double up if I could. And the other part of it is if Quan Alexander's healthy, I want him on my football team. I just think that you got a lot of I don't knows. Again, you can say, well, we used a pick on Zach Baun and we used a pick on Werner. Okay, that's all great and fine. And maybe it might be terrific for 2022. Man, I'm worried about 2021. What can you tell me about Zach today? Of what type of NFL player he is?
Mike, did you read there? I know Dennis Allen did an interview with the Saints website, and he talked about Zach Baun and how he had a hamstring injury, and so they basically just let him do what he did in college, but they're confident that he'll be able to adjust to a new spot. Like, are you buying that maybe, Mike?
I ain't buying it.
So, I mean, I get it, right? If it's the team website, you get great access, but you're also probably getting the spin zone. But, like, is it plausible to think that Baun could be that guy they're really actually sold, that he could develop into that guy?
It might happen. Again, none of us have seen it.
Right.
Okay, what was the original thought? Okay, let's put him at middle linebacker. That's going to be his spot. Then the next thing you know, he's playing at strong side. Then he's been moved to the weak side.
Right.
Okay, right. You're running out of spots here. All right. And I get it, and I think they want it to work. And I think Zach is a really good athlete, and I'm gonna give him a pass for last year, because that was an unusual rookie season for everybody, and for him to come in there, that was difficult. You had no preseason games for him to work out some of the kinks. You had no of the OTAs, rookie camps for him, nothing. So you got to give him a little bit of a pass on that. What I saw last year when he was put in the games, he was taking a bad angle of pursuit. That had nothing to do with a hamstring. He was guessing where he had to be. He wasn't really sure from time to time. So we'll get a much better look at Zach Baun, but he's still at this point, he's a maybe, right?
Yeah, for sure.
He's
no
a
doubt.
maybe. And Werner, I think, is a really solid player. As I told you before, man, across the board, I'd give him Bs. Other than intelligence and instincts, he gets an A on that. But athletically, his ability to play the run, drop in coverage, blitz, you got to give him Bs. And it may come around quickly. But don't give me this nonsense of, well, they've used 2 early picks on a linebacker. Why go out and get Quan Alexander? Okay, open your eyes and watch that film of what he played last year, and tell me how good of a player he was before he went down.
Yeah,
man, he made a difference. And okay, you can analytical this to death, but all I'm telling you is he made a difference on that defense. And I don't know what's going to be available for him free agency. Why he's going to have to take a 1-year sort of prove it deal somewhere. And, I think it would be a great fit. He knows this defense very well. It gives you a little bit of time to work those linebackers around a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with having him here for a year. And then, okay, because really for Zach, it's almost like this is his rookie season too.
Right.
So now you've got a bridge to the next year. You've got a guy who's played, and the negative with Quan, we've all known it, is the fact that he can't stay healthy for 16 games. Has been a difficult ride for him.
Yeah.
And so now you got a little bit of room here to work those young linebackers in, and also you have a veteran. Man, he's skilled. He don't need no preseason games. I play the kids. I don't. Quan Alexander, he can watch. Man, I want you ready when we play the Packers.
Right.
I don't care about preseason. Okay, I know you can play. What I don't know about is I can't tell you how good Zach Baun is, and neither can anyone else. Werner, again, as a rookie, I can't tell you how quick that transition is, but I can tell you about Quan if he's healthy. Man, he can play, and he can play at a pretty high level. So, again, the cornerback linebacker position is something I would take a long look at, because early on, I think your defense is going to have to carry a little bit more water than maybe it has, understanding that this offense is going to look different with Jameis. There's no doubt about that. It's going to look different with him. You're not going to run the same stuff with Winston that you were running with Breeze. He's a different style player. And Sean, he hasn't alluded to any of that, hey, we're going to do what's best for the team. Yeah, I get it. I knew exactly where he's going with this. He's basically sort of telling you, without telling you, we're going to have a little bit different look. How quickly that all comes around offensively. You do have your 5 starting offensive linemen back. You do, hopefully, Michael Thomas can stay healthy. Kamara is unbelievable football player. So you do have some key elements returning, but I think it may look structurally a little bit differently and what you want to do offensively, only because you want to play to Winston's strength as a quarterback. And it's different than Drew.
Right.
And how quickly that comes together. And, we were talking about this with Ron, that, all this stuff about, man, I'm worried about October and November because of the stretch of the tough games. Woo, woo, woo. Let me get the let me get the towel out to wipe up all of the tears. No, think about it. This team has played so well in October and early November throughout the years under Sean. And just do the history work, and it sort of repeats itself every year. My biggest concern is, where has this team struggled even when Bree's in his prime?
Beginning of the season, first month
opening
of the season.
up the early season. And so for me, those early games, Green Bay, New England in Game 3, Carolina in Game 2. Come on, it don't take a rocket scientist to figure that one out. Those 3 games are critical because of the fact Peyton has brought this up on his coaches show so many times about getting off to a fast start, that he thinks that there's something to that. And that's sort of a Parcells type of line, too, that, we play it in quarters, the season in quarters. But, man, you can get off to a 3-1 start, or a 1-3 start. That's a big difference. You're playing from behind now. You're trying to catch up. And you see this team, how well it has hit its stride by October.
Yeah. Mike, do you think it's interesting you went offense, because we did talk about supplementing the defense, which makes a lot of sense. Do you think they need another receiver? Because that seems to be the other part of the conversation, adding a veteran receiver to the mix.
Well, it depends on the right receiver.
Okay. Is there one out there that makes sense stylistically? Because you said they're going to be different offensively with Jameis than Drew, which makes sense. So is there someone out there who would make sense?
This is just my opinion on how it may work out.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised sometimes during the preseason, especially late, with a team that's got maybe a young receiver that has looked pretty good. I got a veteran receiver, he's making some cash, that maybe you make a trade for a veteran wideout somewhere.
So the Saints trade their young receiver for a veteran?
No, the Saints trade a draft choice for a veteran receiver.
Got it.
And because, it happened with Teddy Bridgewater, okay? That Teddy was available. The Jets were sort of, at that time, they thought they were overloaded at quarterback.
Yep.
Okay? And you were able to make the deal for Teddy. And you see it every year. There is a little deal like that for a certain player. And I wouldn't be surprised that maybe you take that approach to it, that there's maybe a veteran receiver that you like, maybe not crazy about his contract, but you like him, and you think he could fit into what you are trying to do offensively. And he's battling some young kids. And maybe coach, GM says, you know what, maybe let's move him. Maybe he's in the final year of his contract. Let's move him. And you can get him. So those type players are there every year for you to acquire. Now, are you willing to do it, to go out and give that pickup for a veteran player? And it's probably not going to cost you a lot. Man, I'd do it. But every year, in talking to a couple of GMs and even former GMs, they were saying the most talk I have is not necessarily so much around draft time, but it's sort of late in the preseason. Now, you only got 3 this year, but say after the second preseason game, where, the phones are ringing. Hey, look, I'm looking to move a guy. You have any interest? This is what I'm looking in exchange for. And before I maybe make a decision to cut him after the third one, to keep a younger player, because pro football is sort of emulating the real world. Somebody making a lot of money, somebody making a little bit of money. I think the talent level's close. I'm sorry. We loved you, but it was we loved with a D at the end. Not, it doesn't end at love. And so it's, you sort of out the door. I do think that happens a lot more than people might think. Well, when you talk to people who have done that in the past and have been on that telephone and talking to other teams about players, and the big question mark is, do you pull the trigger? are you willing to give up at that point? Because I think a lot of GMs are, okay, if you're trying to move him and you don't want a lot for him, I think you might cut him. You might just release him and I can get him and I don't have to give up anything in return. But if you look at where the Saints would kind of fall into that, then you fighting other teams for that player.
Yeah.
So if I got to give up a 6th-round pick or a 5th-round pick for a player and I don't have to fight anybody for it, okay, I'm willing to do it.
Yeah.
And I think, Matt, that's where I'm just speculating. I think that's where the receiver might come in.
Okay. And to your point, Mike, Teddy Bridgewater was acquired for a 6th-round pick. So it was Teddy and a 6th for a 3. I'm sorry, I'm looking at it. It was 20. It was Teddy and a 6 for a 3. That deal. I mean, if you get the player you want, that does make some sense. I do want to ask you about Dare Rosenthal, but I would be remiss if this day came and went, I didn't ask you about your neighbor Joe Clark, someone who you've talked about here on this show you and I have done this for 11 years, and you've told so many stories about Joe Clark, but. Saw on Twitter earlier this week you post, unfortunately, we lost Joe Clark at 88 years old, and I'd love it if you could maybe just share a remembrance for those that saw it or maybe have heard you talk about Joe over the years and maybe didn't know the man.
Man, listen, Joe, unbelievable career, and he was the most modest guy. I introduced him to a young lady from Baton Rouge who has been knows a lot of coaches, and her deal was there is no way he was a coach. He got no ego. He got no ego. Now he did have one, but it wasn't a huge one. He's just a great guy. And you think about this guy who grew up in Inglewood, California, and was an All-American quarterback at Santa Clara. The only time I ever heard him complain was every once in a while. He would tell me, I'm still upset about Dan Pastorini breaking my records. I said, Joe, okay, Dan Pastorini broke your records in the 60s, early 70s. You best get over it by now. He gets drafted by the Cleveland Browns, plays for Paul Brown, coaches for him. Think about that.
Yeah.
Paul Brown is maybe the most influential head coach in the history of pro football. The stuff he did in the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s, they're still doing today. It's amazing. And he picked a lot up from that, from his time with Coach Brown. And to think that the last 26 years, he's lived here in Matthews on the Bayou. Mm. And he would always tell me, Mike, I'm the only guy that my house is more probably talked about more than me. Joe lived in a Sears house, bought off the Sears catalog in 1892.
What?
The Fauché family bought it off the Sears catalog. It got shipped by a barge down the Mississippi, and then there is actually a photo of 12 mules dragging that home from the bayou to where it is today. And so he says, I'm the only son. I'm the only guy that my house is much more interesting than me. So first time I go there, he says, pull down that ladder in the attic and tell me what you think. I said, what you mean? He said, pull on that ladder and see what, I get up there and, okay, this is a house now, that is still in unbelievably great shape. And I take a look in that attic and everything, it's braced. And that's the first thing I saw. Sometimes in a new home, it's not braced like this. And I look up there, I said, wow, it's really braced well. I can see why it withstood. Think about 1892 and all the weather conditions that house has been through, storms it's been through. And he said, you notice anything else? I said, not really. He said, you see a nail? I said, no, I sure don't. It was pegged. The wood connections were pegged in. There is no nail to it. It's not nailed. It was pegged, and it was notched. Man, you talk about craftsmanship, and I'm talking about this is early 1890s to build a house like this, and they got homes, and tragically we see the condo come down, and this house has lived through all of that. It was unbelievable, but he's just a great guy, innovator. 1981, he's at Nicholls State. And Steve Ensminger was his GA. And
Oh, wow.
I never saw this before at that time. One back, three wides, flex tight end. That's what they do today. Joe ran that back in the 80s. And I'm like, what the world's going on here? And he was sort of a mad scientist with things when he retired from coaching. I just think about he goes to NFL Europe, and it was a developmental league. And Al Davis had told him, Joe, we're bringing you in, Joe, to develop these quarterbacks. And sure enough, he had Jay Fiedler, who ended up being a starter in the NFL. And then at one shot, you talk about a lightning strike, Kurt Warner, Jake Delhomme, Mike McCoy. Now, Mike ended up being an assistant coach and ended up being the head coach of the San Diego Chargers for a while.
Yeah.
Jake, just a great career with the Carolina Panthers. And the Saints sort of put him there. But it was Kurt. They watched him work out in Tampa. There were a lot of NFL people that said, okay, we'll get you a young guy, a younger guy than Kurt. Kurt was working at a grocery store playing arena football. And Joe said, no, you're not. He's on this team. And he stood up for Kurt. And Kurt to this day has told me, hey, if it wouldn't have been for Joe Clark, my career would have probably ended in Tampa because that's where they were working out before they sent him to NFL Europe. And he said, Joe stood up for me. He said, I'm not, he's part of this team. I don't care what y'all guys are saying. And so, I think about that, 2 Super Bowl quarterbacks that he was able to coach in his 70s, because he had just reached 70 years old. He was in that region and went through it with that, coached with the Cincinnati Bengals, coached with the Green Bay Packers, had 3 stints with Tulane, got fired on the train ride back from Baton Rouge to New Orleans when they got beat 62-7. And he was like, is the train going to stop and let us off, or are we going to be like a hobo and have to jump off? He said, no, you're going to stop. His best story is the Adam Vinatieri's story. He had never coached special teams. And the Patriots sent Vinatieri to NFL Europe. And Al Luganville tells him, hey, listen, Joe, we don't have enough people. You got to coach special teams. I never coached special teams in my life. Never. He says, well, get ready. He said, it's a start for everything. You got it. And so he said, I spent 80% of my time on offense. I was the play caller, offensive coordinator. And he said, then I'd go work with the kickers. And he said, we had a deep snapper. He said he looked as old as me. So he must have really looked old because even when Joe was young, he looked old. And he's like, man, he had been through every league you could think of. He said, I had a punter that had been cut 8 times in the NFL. And he said, I see this young kid, and he's standing up. And I said, and Joe was sort of hard of hearing unless you were in front of him. And he said, what's your name, kid? And he said, he probably told me Adam. And he said, I thought I heard Alan. And he said, okay, kid. He said, anything you want to tell me how you want the ball placed when you kick it? He said, yeah. He said, when they snap it, he said, I'd like for the holder to tilt the ball forward a degree. And then he says, oh, you want it tilted forward? He said, yeah. And Joe was like, listen, kid, I haven't coached special teams, but even I know you got to tilt that ball back. He said, no, coach. He said, I want it tilted forward. So he said, man, I got the deep snapper and the holder look at me and say, Coach, what do you want us to do? He said, well, you heard him. Tilt it forward. He said, Mikey, he hit that thing. He said, it sounded like a cannon went off. He hit it from 45 yards. He said, I moved him back, 54-yard field goal. He hits it through. So he said, I start moving him hashes, left hash, right hash, just to mess with him. He said he hit every one. So he said, I walk across the field. Luganville said, well, how did he look? He said, who is that? He said, the kicker. He said, Allen really kicked the ball well today. And Luganville was Allen. We don't have an Allen. He said, no. He said, Allen, the place kicker. He said, he's from South Dakota. He's like, we don't have no Allen. It's Adam, not Al. Oh, okay. He said, Mike, I never called him Adam in his entire time. I always would call him Dakota. So he said, we playing in London. He said, the weather kicks up really so bad. And he said, a front passes through. we have the wind blowing in our face. We're trying to get downfield for a field goal late. And he said, we get down to the 38-yard line. And so we got 8 seconds left. I got no more timeouts left. So he says, you know what? I'm not chancing it. I'm going to let Dakota kick it. So he said, man, I'm hollering the special teams, get on the field. He said, I'm looking around. He said, everybody's out there, but he said, Dakota. He said, I look, and he said, Mike, he's so cool. He's sitting on the bench, and he's playing pitch and catch with the helmet, with himself. He's pitching the helmet up, catching it, pitching it. He said, hey, Dakota, they're waiting for you. He said, oh, coach, he said, I thought you had a timeout. No, he said, get up there and kick it. And he said, Vinatieri tells him, coach, do you want me to kind of slow down my delivery on the kick, or you just want me to kick it? I see we got 8 seconds. He said, no, kid, I just want you to kick it through the uprights. Get in there and kick it. He said, Mike, he never saw the kick go through. He kicks it, had his head down. He said he swirled around the holder and came back to the sidelines, and he said, coach, what you want me to do with the rest of the 2 seconds left on the clock?
Wow.
And so he tells me, Super Bowl Sunday, we watching the first time the Patriots are playing the Rams, they're getting field goal range to win it, and it's Vinatieri on the field. And he calls me up and he said, how much money you got in your pocket? You know, at that time, I probably had 150. He said, you want to lose it? Bet me that he don't make it. But he was.
Did you bet him?
Guy. What?
Did you bet him?
No. No. If he's asking me to bet, no. I knew Joe well enough that I wasn't going to put that on the line. But he was just a great guy, unbelievable, way ahead of his time. He would go to Cincinnati. Him and Ensminger drove from, I think, Baton Rouge to Cincinnati, and they were going to meet with the Bengals on offensive formations. And that was the year Cincinnati went to the Super Bowl and played the 49ers. And Steve will tell a story. After about 2 hours, Joe wasn't there to watch. Joe was coaching the coaches for the Bengals on the offense that the Cincinnati ran.
Wow.
He just had that kind of mind that when he retired, he'd wake up at 4 o'clock every morning and do a game plan for an opponent he'd never play, just to keep his mind going. And he unbelievable. And for music lovers out there, if you were around Joe, you heard one thing over and over and over again. Steely Dan. He played that everywhere. You got in a car with him, you heard Steely Dan. If you were sitting with him talking football, you heard Steely Dan. I mean, that was his deal. Man, he loved Steely Dan. And so we're going to miss him. He had a huge impact for so many people. And you think about the impact that he had on so many people calling last week when they found out he had gotten really ill. And it was amazing. He's a great guy. I'm going to miss him. We had a lot of fun times. He worked with a number of NFL prospective quarterbacks. He would do that in the off season. And he's in his 80s doing this, walking with a cane and coaching quarterbacks. It was unbelievable. Why are we doing this in Matthews, Louisiana?
Yeah.
And so I'll miss him. He's a great guy. And he was the head coach at EA at East Ascension in late 70s.
I got to ask you about Dare Rosenthal transferring out. I'll just give you the floor for these 3 minutes, what it means for LSU in 2021 and beyond.
I was surprised he came back, to be honest with you. I had a lot of calls about the Rosenthal in late November and into December from NFL people looking. They knew what type of talent he was. They were concerned about off the field stuff, and could he be focused, and could he, that sort of thing. And and my answer to him was what I'll tell you today. I don't know, and so it's a big loss because they were counting on him, and now Cameron Wire comes into play. And I think Cam's a really good player. He's physically gotten bigger. He's worked hard to get stronger. I talked to Ed. He had told me, Mike, I think he could play left or right tackle. If we needed to. So now, man, do they need him at left tackle? And you got zilch behind him now. I mean, because really Cam was your guy. If something happened to Austin or something happened to Rosenthal, Cam could fill in either way. What happens if something goes down with Cam?
Yeah.
Now who becomes? Is it Dumerville? Is it Xavier Hill? So That, to me, is the biggest thing to watch in the spring. Everybody's going to be watching Everybody's going to be watching the quarterbacks. My thing is the development of the offensive line, not only for this year, for next year. But I'm worried more about this year because that's the year I'm playing in. But, man, if something happens injury-wise, I know what will happen inside with Bradford could step in. Man, at the edges now, you awfully thin at tackle.
Is Garrett Dellinger a possibility at tackle, Mike? The freshman?
You want to play an 18-year-old freshman?
I don't. That's what I'm asking, though. I mean, it's been a rare day, but we've seen it.
You have, but you haven't seen it a lot. And there's a reason. That's a difference between an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old young man. It's not the speed part of the game. It's the physicality. And it's not every once in a while. It's every week when you play in the SEC.
Right.
So I think they're certainly going to give him some opportunities and a lot of work. How well he can handle the physical part of that to me is always the case with a young offensive lineman. I think footwork, the quickness part, they have that at that age. It's the physicality and doing it week to week.
He is Mike Detillier, saintsreport.com, MikeDetillier.com, Saints News Network over at SI.com. Been with us every Thursday in hour number 2 for 11 years now. We're looking forward to another football season right around the bend. Mike D, you're the best. We appreciate you as always, man.
Thank you, Matthew.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.